Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're dialing in from around the world. My name is Goutham Ramdas, and I'd like to welcome you to today's ISTAT Chats, Pathways into Aviation, featuring Darren Hulst and brought to you by the ISTAT Rising Executives program. Darren is the Vice President of Boeing's Commercial Marketing Division. In his current role, Darren leads the Boeing's team in marketing commercial airplanes and services. He is responsible for presenting Boeing's commercial market outlook, which forecasts demand for new aircraft over the next 2 decades. Our chat today is designed for early career professionals and executives looking to understand the various pathways that exist for a long and enjoyable career in aviation. For many, it can be a daunting task to find your footing in a vast and ever-evolving industry. Hopefully, today's chat will give you some insight into those avenues that exist. Before we get started, I would like to remind the audience to submit any questions you have throughout the presentation through the Q&A box in your Zoom toolbar. A recording of today's presentation will be available on ISTAT's website within 48 hours. At the end of the session, an online evaluation will populate your screen. Please remember to take the time to complete the evaluation as it helps us plan for our future programs. At this time, I'd like to welcome Darren to our ISTAT chat. Darren, welcome. Thanks for your time.
Hi, how are you doing? Happy to be
here. Thank you. You've had an incredible journey, from working at the airport check-in desk to becoming Boeing's Vice President of Commercial Marketing. When you look back at your career, what were some of the key moments that helped shift your career trajectory?
That's a good question. I mean, the first one I think was finding out that I actually had a passion for aviation. I like to tell the story, and it probably bores people to some extent, but I had graduated university kind of at the half point of a year, so in the winter as opposed to the spring term, and was planning to go to graduate school because that was like the next obvious step. And fill time, for 6 months, I looked into various part-time jobs, including internship and various things along the field that I was going to. I was an econ graduate. And one of the things that I just randomly found, and this is going to sound super old-fashioned, is the classified ad section of a newspaper that advertised for a ramp agent in my hometown at the airport for American Eagle, which is a subsidiary or was a subsidiary of American. And so I went in and applied for the job, got an interview, and the station manager kind of asked me, well, why are you interested in this job? And I said, I've always been fascinated with airplanes. When I was a kid, I'd go to the airport and just watch planes land and take off, even if I wasn't flying out. And this just sounds cool. And I'm only going to do something temporarily, so that's great. And so once I got into it, it was sort of like something clicked as opposed to just being a job. I had time to learn where airlines flew, how the reservation system works, where networks connected, and how to get people to their destination. And it just got to the point where I knew I had to do something in it, and it also taught me what I didn't want to do. And so I did an internship with like a local government agency and realized I didn't want to work in government. So learning kind of what you have a passion for is priceless. And you can't replace that. And sometimes it takes 5 years, sometimes it takes 5 minutes. But I think that to me was like just foundational in terms of, it sets an idea in your mind of, I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I know I want to be in this industry. And so for me, that was number one. And then later on, as sort of my career progressed, instead of de-icing airplanes and checking bags, I got into network planning. I got into kind of different roles at Delta. And I think at that point it was really about timing and opportunity. And so to me, you can't worry about how long or short you're in a job. It's more about when the opportunity presents itself, avail yourself to it. If there's a challenge you think you might be able to do, chances are you can, and take it on and use your passion, but also the curiosity to go attack, something that might be a little bit more difficult or a little bit out of your norm, and see how it goes. And I think both of those things kind of help guide, a career path. And like I said, it could be kind of choppy. I was in
Right.
my first job for a few years, or maybe even 4 years, and then I probably had three more jobs in the next 4 years. And so, just don't set a goal that depends on factors that you can't control. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that makes sense. And I think, for many people, they think about aviation careers that primarily exist in the cockpit or on the flight deck or in the cabin or in engineering
Hmm.
roles. For me, when I got into this industry, I had a very similar thought process. And of course, it took me a
Yeah,
couple of years to figure out, look, there's a plethora of opportunities with the
yeah,
aviation industry. It's not just on, working for an airline or the manufacturing,
sure.
right? There's plenty of them. In your opinion, what are some of the lesser known parts of the industry where someone can build an almost equally impactful career?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a hard one for me. I mean, to me, it could be anything. And obviously, I've switched from an airline to a manufacturer, and both are such diverse companies because
Right,
a global airline has so many roles, and obviously a manufacturer, just because the supply chain and the complexity of an airplane is just a massive company too. So the beauty of the companies that I've worked for is that they're kind of, multiple employers in one. So you have
right,
an opportunity to see various parts of and exercise different skills and build a background. But I would say, you know, just over the last few years, some of the things that stick out to me, and it sounds maybe a little bit boring, but supply chain is something that as the industry continues to grow and the requirement and the demand continues to grow, I said something like this today in another presentation, is, the statement that is so true, but also so simple is what's the most important part of an airplane, and
right.
it's part you don't have. And so you can't build an airplane without all the parts, right? And so the supply chain and the challenges that have been, I would say, featured in the industry for the last few years are also a huge opportunity as we go forward.
Yeah,
I think, going back to what we do today, as part of my team, our forecast for the industry, and I think it's pretty conservative, is that the industry, the global fleet is going to double over the next
right.
20 years. So if that's going to happen, there's a lot of barriers that need to be removed in the industry. But one of them, from a supply chain standpoint, is that we need to have a global supply chain that can support doubling production, doubling, the
Yeah,
the size and scale, and that's going to include existing suppliers, new suppliers,
yeah,
diversification. I mean, managing that is so complex and it requires humans. And I think
yeah,
that's one aspect from my perspective. I'm always going to be biased in terms of, my background has been on, like, where do we fly airplanes and how do
right.
airlines make money. And so I still think, understanding and having a passion for how the industry actually generates sustainable profits
Yeah,
and success is super important. And so having uh, an ability or a willingness to learn and be curious about how airlines, do their business and how they compete and how they succeed. So on the top line, that would be, maybe network planning. It might
yeah,
be opportunity development and like looking forward from a strategic standpoint. But
sure.
there's so many opportunities. The key is, having an interest in it. And
Right.
once you get sucked in, I think, you know, you we've seen from our own probably careers that once you're in the industry, there's so many places you can go, but also it's hard
Right.
to get out because it's so fun and so dynamic. And
Yeah, you're right. I think it constantly evolves, and once that proverbial bug bites you, it's very difficult to let it go,
yeah,
Um, you mentioned something about supply chain being a key piece of the industry. Do you think post-COVID,
yeah,
there are more supply chain opportunities for young college graduates to get their foot in the industry?
100%. And I don't even think it's just from a manufacturing standpoint. You look at different suppliers, you
Right,
also look at airlines. I mean, airlines have their own supply chain teams because of just the life cycle of their operation,
right.
whether it's to support their operation, whether it's to support, the way they do maintenance and manage the life cycle of aircraft.
Yeah,
Um, it's the scale is there, and the complexity is only increasing, especially as we look at how airlines are trying to differentiate themselves.
yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity.
you obviously worked for both an airline and you work for a major OEM.
Yeah.
In looking at both the different sectors in the industry, how do career paths and culture differ in both those worlds?
Okay. Um, Career paths, I think, what again, the one similarity I think is that an airline has many jobs in
Right,
one. It's not just a vertical in terms of one area of expertise that you just get smarter and smarter and smarter, and all of a sudden you're running the company. It's
right,
all the parts of the business that need to work together to be successful. And so whether it's revenue, whether it's operational, whether it's technical, there are so many roles at
yeah,
both the airline and the manufacturer. Um, the the difference is, I think, depend on scale or depend on
sure,
size of the company.
yeah,
Because to me, the balance at an airline is agility, meaning you
right,
have to in many cases do many things to keep things running, especially at a smaller, like a startup or a low cost airline, where you're wearing a lot of different hats to
yeah,
make sure. And it's great because you get that exposure. And a manufacturer, especially the one on the scale of ours, you still you still have to have ownership and take ownership of the job that you have. But there's also processes and regulation and things that make sure that that things are going according to regulation and according to process. And so I think those can be a little bit different in terms of how they actually turn into
yeah,
career slash how things work. But I, yeah, it's hard for me to fully kind
sure,
of differentiate, because at the end of the day, there's so many just different aspects of both
yeah.
companies that really provide a diverse set of opportunities.
I think it's interesting because I think post-COVID, we've seen a huge boom in global travel. And I think that's
Yeah,
created a ton of opportunity, not just for people to see the world and get back and travel, but at the same time, there's new entrants into the market almost every day. Um, I find that fascinating because you'll hear different sectors having a swath of new entrants getting in, especially in the aftermarket side, right?
mm,
And on the supply chain side. And I think you can see that translating on various different levels, or not just on the
yeah,
aftermarket side, but even on the lessor side, on the financing community.
mm,
And I think that in itself is an encouraging sign for so many college graduates and young professionals, because they can think about, I don't have to necessarily start my career out working for a major airline or an OEM. I can work my way there, as opposed to
yeah,
figuring out, hey, I got to climb to the top of the mountain right out of
no.
gate day one.
No, I agree. In some ways, a lot of times when I talk to people who are new to our company, I tell them the time is now for broadening yourself,
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Because,
yeah,
sometimes you hear the thing, well, you need experience here, you need background here. It's a whole lot easier to get that background if you're willing to move around at more of the baseline kind of understanding than it is, say, if you do the same area, the same
right.
kind of sector, and you just slowly ascend through the ranks, and then all of a sudden you want to diversify or broaden your background. Sometimes that requires, I would say, lateral at best, and sometimes moving backwards.
Yeah,
And when you're starting out, the beauty of the opportunity is getting that broad base of experience. You can pick what you'd like, what you don't like, what drives your passion, what doesn't, and then kind of use that to
yeah.
steer where you want to ascend through.
Do you find that people always ask you, hey, do I need to have an educational background in
Yeah,
aviation to get into this industry? I know
right.
it's a bit of a mixed bag in terms of responses, right?
Yeah. I mean, people ask me that all the time, and I struggle because I actually don't have an advanced degree.
Right,
Do have the luxury or the benefit of being, in many cases, at the right place at the right time in terms of opportunities. So whether it was good or bad, obviously,
right,
during my career at Delta, the industry was going through a lot of challenges because of post 9/11. low-cost carriers, consolidation, all the things that cause huge
Yep.
challenges in the
Yep.
market. And I had thought many times, multiple times about, hey, when should I either stop, exit and do a full-time MBA, or
Right.
maybe, go to night school or do something like that. And each time I talked about the opportunity, with my leaders, they said, hey, you know what, full support if you want to do that. But
Yeah.
right now the world is on fire and you are key to our team.
Right.
So I feel like this is might be better for your career in terms of the experience that you're getting.
Right.
Um, and so to me, being there in some cases 12, 15 hours a day during some challenging projects, or probably paid back way higher ROI than stepping
100%.
away, right? And so that's a situation that I happen to be in. And so I tell people that ask me that question, it really, like, it's a cop out, but it depends. If
Yeah.
you have the time and you have the opportunity and you really have an interest and you feel like you have a gap, from a knowledge standpoint,
Yeah.
I totally think there's value in advanced degrees or at least other technical learnings, but
Yeah.
don't think that's the holy grail or the only way, because
Yeah.
as we all know, um, the rubber meets the road. And I hate to use like figures of speech that maybe people understand, but like at the end of the day, your education might get you in the door, but it doesn't get you promoted. It
Right.
doesn't get you, it doesn't prove that you can do it, because really, it's really about how you perform in a job
Yeah.
and how you approach it. And so I think it really depends. And
Yeah.
it's more about what you think is right at the time and how much time you have to dedicate to your passion. So yeah.
Yeah. And I have had people ask me that question as well. And I tell them, said, look, I don't think that's a prerequisite to people to enter this
No.
industry. In
No.
fact, the smartest people I've ever met didn't necessarily
Yeah.
have an aviation background themselves,
Yeah.
right? I think you learn that so much on the job and through a process of osmosis by being
Yeah.
around people that know it, you soak up a lot of knowledge.
Sure.
So I think for everybody that always wonders, hey, I would love to get into aviation, but I know nothing about,
Right.
I don't have a formal education. I don't think you
Yeah.
have one. I think it's
No.
just, it's a nice to have. It's not a must have.
Agreed. And I think what you do with it is the most important part.
Yeah,
You know
very
what I
much
mean?
so. Very much so.
Informal education on the job, experience, if you leverage it, could be twice as good as a top 10 MBA. But on the other
1000%.
hand, a top 10 MBA could be super valuable if you pair that with the passion that we all need to succeed here.
Yep. Uh, Talking about the industry in general, I mean, from your perspective, what segments of the industry are quietly creating some of the most opportunities for the next generation? And I guess to take it one step further, why aren't people talking about it as much, or why are we not hearing about it as much?
Hmm.
And I think about, when I think about this, I'm thinking about, eVTOL aircraft and,
Yeah.
next generation power aircraft. Like there's a huge buzz about it, but
Yeah.
I don't know if, it's being talked about in its full scope from a
Oh.
career standpoint.
Hmm. Yeah, it's that one's hard for me because I don't want to sound old-fashioned or cynical about innovation, because innovation has been such, I mean, it's driven our industry for the last 120 years.
Right,
But I also think, in the current environment, that we also have to pair that with some practicality, if that makes
right,
sense. And
right,
so for me, the cool thing about things like alternative, eVTOL or hybrid, aviation is, what is the intersection between these new technologies and the conventional or the existing commercial aviation infrastructure? We're not going to change overnight from
right,
the airport system, from but how is the intersection going to evolve and
right,
create opportunities? I don't think you snap your fingers and you see a million eVTOLs, but maybe, right, over time, some of those innovations, whether it's, electrification, whether it's the regional aspect of how people connect to
right,
medium-sized or major airports, and also even kind of step changes in automation. Those things um, are where we're going to see things evolve as opposed to be a revolution, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And
No,
so
it does.
finding, yeah,
Let's talk a little bit about skills and career, mindsets and career foundations, because I think that's the crux of what so many people think about when they graduate college and when they're starting their career in aviation.
yeah,
You've been obviously on both sides of the hiring table. When you look at a
yeah,
candidate, what separates a candidate that you remember from one that tends to blend into a pile of resumes? I mean, I think technology today has gotten to the point where we can apply for jobs so quickly, right?
I
We're just
know.
in a click of a button, we're able to send a resume through LinkedIn. But in a world where jobs are hyper competitive at times, and
Yeah,
sometimes there are certain barriers to entry. When you look at a
yeah.
candidate, what do you look for that separates them from that crowd, especially
Hmm.
especially entry level positions, or mid to entry level positions?
Yeah, it's a hard one because you're not able to judge them on empirical performance always, right?
Yeah.
It's to me, I think it's attitude
Right. Of
is important, really, really important. I mean, that's important throughout your career, but it's important
course.
as how you show up,
Yeah.
how you interact, because it gives me a sense of how you'll be on a team and how you're going to approach, an opportunity or work.
Yeah.
Um, I would say homework that you do.
Yeah.
So sound like you know what you're talking about when you come into
Yeah.
a job. I don't mean you need to be an expert, but
Bro.
show that you learn you care enough to have done some research on why you're a good candidate and what the heck the opportunity actually is. Ask good questions.
Yeah.
What are you looking for in an employee? How could I be a good candidate, or how what makes a great performer in the job that you're hiring for? I mean, ask those kind of questions so
Yeah.
it you look like, you show that you have more than just a passing interest. I mean, be smart
Yeah.
about the company, be smart about the role, and if you can't be, ask the questions that show that you're curious enough
Yeah.
about those opportunities. So to me, that's great. It's attitude, it's a willingness to learn, and enough care that you're not just going through the motion.
Yeah. And I think one thing I find as I've had a chance to do a couple of these myself, I find when you get into a conversation, as opposed to just kind of a rhythmic back and forth interview, as you get into a deeper conversation about the role or whatever
Yeah.
opportunity it is, sometimes that passion starts to bleed out as you
Yes.
as you speak to the person. You can tell if they're really
Mm.
passionate about what they're about to get into, or is this almost a little bit, hey, I need to find a job and this is kind of
Yep.
my path, right?
Yep.
And I think
Yep.
I find that to be very telling in terms of a candidate and where they would fit organizationally as part of a culture too. And that
Yeah.
always helps me guide. It's kind of my northern star in terms of guiding. Hey, which direction do I want to go with this?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
mean, sometimes first impressions can be challenging. However, you you what you give off in terms of your personality, your
yeah,
attitude is really important. And it needs to be genuine.
I think that's a big piece of it. But separate to all that, well, I also think about it from a recent college graduate standpoint, right? When I was graduating from Purdue in my master's, I was thinking, okay, where do I want to go with this?
Yeah.
We were taught that, hey, you're natural career paths. You can go work for all the major airlines. You can go work for the major OEMs. But when you think about step one, it feels quite daunting. Like, where do I go? How do I start? Like, what's the first move I make?
Yeah.
Um, so I guess what I think about is, especially when entry level roles ask for several years of experience, how do
Yeah.
you recommend young professionals navigate that paradox?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think it doesn't hurt, and again, this is something in hindsight, but can you get an internship, or can you
Yeah,
lay some groundwork during the latter stages of your undergrad, right? If that's where you are, or even a graduate time frame, to sort of at least get a foot in the door,
right, right.
that is not always possible, but it's often an opportunity both for manufacturers, for lessors, and for
Yeah,
airlines. As far as I know that happens. That is an opportunity that is a great way to get, I wouldn't say like super high quality experience,
Right.
but you can get you're a known entity, right? You might half the time you're taking tours and meeting people, but you've got your foot in the door. People know how you might be able to perform, and that is just as good as experience, at least at the entry level.
Yeah.
I think, gosh, it's a really good question. Because I'm trying to think if I was doing this again, I don't know that I could come into the roles I was
Yeah.
able to come into today like I was able to 30 years ago or 20 whatever years ago. You know, it, I think there's still pathways to build
Yeah.
experience from the front line to the I would say the white collar type jobs, but it's slightly narrower, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And so sticking out, I mean, I've had people who, they tell me about emails and contacts that they've reached out to at airlines and manufacturers just to show them how passionate they are about a
100%.
role or about, I
Yep.
mean, and it might not get you a job in the exact organization, but boy, that stands out as somebody who has enough passion, but also pairs it with actually doing something about it. And I think that helps kind of show that there's something more behind somebody, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. So don't be
I
afraid
call
to
it the
reach out.
moonshot approach, right?
Yeah,
Like you just say,
yeah,
just shoot for the moon. Like, hey,
yeah. It and do it in a way that shows it's not just a random moonshot. You know what I
right,
mean? It's like somebody contacted me and they had at one point designed their own network or some ideas for Delta, right?
right.
And we're not going to hire them immediately to be the manager of like the Atlanta hub, right? Or something.
Yeah, of
However, boy, that sticks out as somebody we might
course.
want as an intern or
Yeah,
might, help coach into a role that separates them from somebody else because boy, they weren't just shooting. There was something behind
yeah.
what they were shooting. If that makes sense.
You touched on something very interesting, I think, and we all, within the industry talk about it a lot, like how aviation is famously such a small world. People
Yeah.
just everybody knows everybody to a certain degree. And I think a lot of that comes from years and years of people going to almost the same conferences, working on
Maybe.
similar deals. You intersect in some shape or form at some point or the other. For people like young college graduates, so people that are just starting their career, a lot of the rising executives that we talk about, right? What advice do you think you can give them for them to be able to build a network from scratch that to a certain degree it doesn't feel forced, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. In other words, you're not just cold calling or walking up to strangers. Is that what you're saying? Or how do
Yeah,
you mean?
or trying to build like meaningful relationships that take you that take you 10, 20
Yeah.
years into your career. Or
Yeah.
you're working with some valuable
Yeah.
resources that not only help you professionally, but also on a personal
Mm.
level as well.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would say don't treat any, networking opportunity as purely transactional, if that makes
Yeah,
sense. Because,
yeah,
the one thing that I've learned through my, you know, two companies, but just 25 years of in the industry is
yeah,
I've seen people work for people and then switch, your boss can become your employee or your colleague can become your competitor. And, having the relationship is in
yeah,
many cases the differentiator, if that makes
yeah,
sense. Because, um, y- you know, I guess going back to what I said, just don't treat a network opportunity as someone who can do something for you.
right.
Treat it as something that can be beneficial over the long term and somebody you genuinely like, talking to.
Yeah,
Be curious, if that makes sense. In other words,
yeah,
as you network with people, try to understand what makes them tick.
yeah,
How does their business actually plug into our industry? In other words, there's so many niches, right? How do they
yeah,
make money? How do they compete? Who do
yeah,
they recruit? So make it constructive in a way that's not, like I said, just purely one direction or one dimensional. And then you genuinely, I mean, and you can't force this, just
yeah,
be a good person. I mean,
yeah,
be 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 genuinely interested in who you're talking to, but also in building a relationship that is not just one cocktail.
Absolutely. I
And
find it
don't,
fascinating in that sense too, because when I mean you go to a lot of these ISTAT events and
yeah,
all these networking events, I find that I learn more from just talking to somebody
yeah,
than I could
yeah,
spend maybe 5 hours reading up on it
yeah.
in terms
And
of
if
that knowledge
somebody,
transfer.
totally agree. And if somebody just walks up to you and like the only thing they really want to do is get your card or give you their card, then I don't quite understand like what are you
Yeah,
getting out of this, right?
yeah,
But it's more about having a conversation. And at the end of the day, somebody really wants to hey, what's your name? What's your name again? How
yeah,
do I stay in touch with you? That's what you want. So
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. We've got a question that just came through on the chat from one of the attendees. I am studying aviation management and I need to do an internship in my last semester.
Yeah.
Can you give me some advice about it? If I should prefer applying for airports or airlines, or if you have any general advice for an aviation management graduate?
Oh boy. That's a hard one for me to be super smart about. I would say yes, go keep cast a wide net.
Yeah,
Look for
agreed.
airlines. Airports are fascinating too because honestly, that's an ecosystem that we don't often talk about in an ISTAT kind of situation, but it incredibly important from an infrastructure standpoint. It's in some cases a pretty protective and pretty
Yeah,
profitable side of the business, which is interesting. I mean, from that standpoint, and you can learn a ton about the operations, about investment, about how the system works from that standpoint as well. So I would say, you know, cast a wide net in
yeah,
terms of those opportunities because the internships they kind of go in cycles. Sometimes you'll have way more opportunities, and sometimes the situations are more challenging at companies, and you just I would say don't be too narrow in terms of
yeah,
who you reach out to and look across even suppliers. I
yeah.
mean, it's an important segment as well.
You're right. It's part of an ecosystem, a larger ecosystem, right? Airports are, and there's quite a few of them around the country, big cities, small cities, emerging markets, all around the world too. So
Yep.
there is a definitely a chance for people to at least get their foot in the door from starting at that level.
Totally agree. In different parts of the world, they can be public entities or they're
Yeah,
privatized, right? And so
yeah,
there's a lot of different angles. And at the end of the day, you're still part of the aviation ecosystem, and it's an angle that can provide a tremendous amount of experience as well.
absolutely. I think one of the other questions the attendee had asked was general advice for an aviation management graduate. From my perspective, when I was graduating with my
Yeah.
master's degree, I was thinking, okay, you always have people visiting your college campuses from different
Okay.
industries, right? They always have
Yeah.
like industry events, but I find one part they talk you don't really hear much about aside from the commercial aviation side is even the general aviation side or even from the
Yeah.
corporate aviation side, right?
Yeah.
There's so much more opportunity there as well. Um,
Sure.
so I think for me, if I was just tell this to somebody, I'm very curious to hear what you would have to say as well, Darren, is I would say don't be shy about seeing what else is outside the box because you never know
Yeah.
where your starting foot is going to be as opposed to what you
Yeah.
thought it was going to be.
Right. No, I don't close yourself down to the opportunities. And I think you're right. The general aviation world is so much bigger,
Yeah,
and there is so much out there. It's not something that I'm super familiar with, but it's um, when you think about, especially in the U.S., how big that industry is.
yeah.
Don't close off to that as well.
Absolutely. We got another one that just came through. And again, thank you all for your questions. They're great. This one from another of the attendees asking, how instrumental have the leaders you've worked with over the years been to your career growth and or exposure to the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in some ways, I've learned a tremendous amount from leaders in terms of who I want to be as a leader. In
Absolutely.
some ways, I think I have learned a lot about who I don't want to be. In other words, lessons that like this is a great example of what you want to do, and then also
Yep.
never do that
Yep.
in terms of how you lead. I also think, some great leaders that I've worked with have put me in position to succeed, if that makes sense. In other words, a great leader looks really great when they enable their people to make them look good, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
in other words, giving an opportunity to contribute to a project, to be part of a meeting, be exposed to a customer or an activity or an event, and those things are incredibly valuable, and it shows that they have enough confidence and leadership to enable people as opposed to protect themselves, if that
Yeah.
makes sense, or to isolate that. Um, and then, just a way that uh, leaders, I say, spend their time. In other words,
Yeah.
yeah, it's great to be traveling around the world, or to be in uh, high level meetings, but on the other hand, spending time with teammates and being genuinely interested in somebody's
Yeah.
career and somebody's interest, that goes and pays huge dividends as well in terms of showing that this is a group, an organization, and also a career that is worth being in. So yeah.
I agree with you. I think that makes all the sense. And I think, for us, I consider it to be fortunate when we are able to work with people that genuinely want to impart that knowledge to us, either whether it's
Yeah.
through process of osmosis, or if you're just being said, hey, I'm going to have you be part of this project because
Yeah.
I think you're ready for it. I think you're ready to
Sure.
take that next step, right? That logical step in your career.
Yeah.
I sometimes call it baptism by fire to a certain degree because
Can be. Yeah.
but I think along the way you learn so much that okay, like you said, I'm definitely going to take these elements in my next role, maybe not this. And I
Yeah.
think you try to take the best of it all and make
Yeah.
yourself that person. So it's
Yeah.
a great question. I think going from that, I want to talk a little bit about ISTAT and some of the stuff that ISTAT offers for some of the young professionals that are
Mm.
starting their career in the industry. As we all know, ISTAT offers programs like PDP and ISTAT U that gives students and young professionals, quite a bit of that technical knowledge and exposure to call it the aviation finance world.
Yeah.
From your
Yeah.
perspective, like how can participants use those opportunities, not just to build their own skills, but to translate them into real career pathways and even to a certain
Mm.
degree, industry connections? I know it's a bit of a high level question, but
Yeah.
I'm just curious to get your take on it.
Okay. So my high level take is, you're not going to become an expert by going through the PDP. You're not
Yep.
going to become like all of a sudden a promotable, in your own role by being in the Rising Executives. But the experience, the exposure, and the network that you build absolutely will pay back. And what I mean by that is, the role that you're in today probably is relatively singular in
Yep.
some, depending on where you are. And the PDP, to my knowledge, and I know we have our own people that go through the PDP from Boeing, and it's very similar to things that we do at Boeing to some of our customers, which is you get exposed to all the different elements of commercial aviation.
Yep.
And it's not going to make you a PhD or a master, but it's going to get you exposed to how this works, and
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
at least fundamentals about what could work. And sometimes you're going to hear terms that don't make any sense, but you're curious about, and
Yeah.
you can go research that on your own. And in other situations, I think you'll get an expert talking about a subject where you gain an appreciation for
Yeah.
something that you had no idea about. And so to me, use it as the basics, or just fundamentals that maybe pique your interest for deeper diving into
Yeah.
later on. The other piece would be the networking. And I know I don't love the word networking, honestly, because it's so broad, but
Yeah.
I've seen it because I've you know we've hosted Boeing hosts the PDP, I think, once a year,
Yep. In November.
twice a year. Yeah. And I've seen the camaraderie that develops
Absolutely.
in those groups, in just what, obviously you're together for a few weeks, but through the course of the whole, I would say, experience.
Right.
And it's priceless because you're building relationships that will ultimately be something that you call on throughout your career. And so invest in that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a cheap investment because you're all in it together.
Yeah.
And the more from each other at that point, and the more friendships that you build, the more fun it's going to be throughout your career. I
I
would
also
say
think no, no, sorry, I apologize. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
the last thing I was just going to say is use it as in some cases ways to ask questions from
Yeah.
people in the industry that you either admire, that you want to learn more about,
Yeah.
to learn how things work, and to build a little bit of a connection to kind of other companies and other kind of structural elements of the industry. So yeah.
I also find that, doing the ISTAT, I got to do it a couple of years ago. And the biggest takeaway for me was how easy it was to build a network of people that are in various segments of the industry, just right off the bat, right? You're with them on all these
Yeah.
classes, learning every day, and they all come from different backgrounds within the industry. I think ISTAT does a great job of curating that group based on specific skills they bring from various elements of the aviation business. So uh, I think the biggest benefit that I got out of it when I took it was the network that I have. I still stay in touch with all of them today, and
Yeah.
we ended up working on occasion together. So
Oh,
uh,
cool.
it's kind of the easiest way to start building that network, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think sometimes we wish we could provide more,
Yeah,
PDP opportunities because it is it is so simple in many ways. It's not, like I said, it's not going to make anybody a genius, but man, the amount of connections and the camaraderie that you get out of it
absolutely.
is totally worth it. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. We just got another question that came through from another attendee. I want to ask what kind of soft skills, if any, specific are important in this industry from a careers perspective. Any
mm,
soft skill that you would recommend that needs to be more prioritized, and something you would recommend for others to learn to, especially from a graduate standpoint.
soft skills. Yeah. I mean, when I got into the industry, I was like not a public speaker, right?
Yeah.
Or not a necessarily even an extrovert. I'm probably still not an extrovert. But um I think being able to take technical or industry data analytics or anything that you specialize in
Yeah.
and tell a story with it
Yeah.
is super valuable. And I don't care where you are in any industry. I think we find, and I find even at Boeing, is like there's so many smart people, so many.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you can't tell a story, bring it up a level
Right.
in terms of the how you express yourself and try to get a point across, you're losing so much, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, whether it's telling your story personally
Right.
or from a career standpoint, or telling the story of what you're doing, that soft skill is absolutely priceless. Whether it's a PowerPoint, and
Right.
how you communicate whatever presentation style that is required, or just how you convey yourself. That soft skill is so important. I
Yeah.
mean, don't underestimate the value of deep analytics, but like if you can't get out of the weeds, then people are going to assume you can't, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned you talked about analytics.
Yeah.
If I could touch on that for a quick second, do you feel like analytics is becoming more and more prevalent in today's world because that's driving so many decisions? And
Uh-huh.
from a career standpoint, do you think it's something that people need to focus on early on because that's going to help them? I know it's a bit of a hard skill, I guess, in that sense, but is analytics driving the career path for a lot of people in today's world?
I think more so than it used to, for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, when I was coming into the industry and the things I learned in network planning, for example,
yeah,
I was really good at Excel. um, I could do a little bit of Microsoft Access,
yeah,
database coding,
yeah,
and I knew what SAS programming was, but
yep,
I couldn't write it, And now, just the amount of data is
right,
orders of magnitude more. And
right,
so, how do you make sense of it? I still think sometimes simple is better, but
of
you
course,
have to be able to manage the data and the trends because that's what is where we are as an
yeah,
industry. And so, to me, having some analytics capability sets you apart. What sets you apart further is knowing what to do with it and how to tell the story. Because
Yeah.
if you can you can manage data all day long, but if you don't know
Right.
what to do with it, if you can't distill it, if you don't have the critical thinking skills, then
Yeah.
you still aren't any further ahead.
And I think that's where you talked about, the ability to be able to tell that story based on the numbers comes into play. Because when you merge
Yeah.
those soft skills, when that particular soft skill together with the ability to decipher numbers,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
it makes you quite powerful. I find it.
You can't get lost. You have to be able to do something with it. And sometimes it's testing and failing, right?
Yeah.
Like I got a hypothesis about this data and it either pans out or it doesn't, but being willing to make those calls, but also to test things out and see
Yeah.
how they work, you know?
Yep. Um, let's talk about leadership a little bit. Obviously from Delta to Boeing, you've led
Yeah.
teams change, uncertainty through so many industry events in the last, 2 or 3 decades or
Yeah.
so, and
Yeah.
growth. When you look back at it, what have you learned about leadership that applies equally across the board? Doesn't matter if you're a CEO or if you're an intern. Like, what's a lesson in leadership you think that everybody can apply equally across the board?
Yeah. Honestly, as hard of a question as it is, I think it's really easy to answer.
Yeah,
Because I think one, you can only control what you can control, right? In other words, like external factors are going to happen.
yeah,
You not running the company, and in many cases, macro environment is going to overwhelm anything you do. But control what you can control, and what I mean by that is take ownership of what you have ownership of,
yeah,
and and whether it's leading a team or doing a project as part of a team, I think those equally apply. And so don't get overwhelmed by things that you can't control. um Two, take ownership of the job that you have.
yeah.
Don't assume somebody else is going to do it for you, because if
Yep.
that happens, then all of a sudden, people are pointing like this. Treat people um, as well or better than you want to be treated, if that makes
100%.
sense. Because
Yes.
if you don't, people don't want to work with you, they don't like you, and they won't work hard for you. And that's the same thing applies to somebody who's just joining a job, right? Treat people well, and people want to help you develop. They'll want to include you on projects, and they'll want to be part of your community. Um, I would say don't change your personality to fit
Yeah.
a role that you think you need to fill. I feel like the biggest examples, going back to an earlier question of something that I learned I didn't want to do, was watching people moving from, I would say, individual contributors to formal leaders
Yeah.
suddenly change who they were. I'm like, that dude, what are you doing? You know what I mean? If suddenly you either expect to be treated like, like somehow you became royalty or elite. No. I mean, one, don't change your personality. Treat people like you're their colleague, like you're their partner, like you're part
Yep.
of the team.
100%.
But two, don't change how you think your status, what
Yeah.
you deserve. Because you know what? People know that you got promoted. People know that you're a leader. You don't need to tell them that,
Yep.
And I think that's important. And then the last thing that I think fits from a leadership just as well as it does to anybody in a team or an organization is being willing to say yes. And what I
Yeah.
mean by that is don't be afraid of what you think you can't do,
Right.
because chances are you can figure out how to do it. And if
Yep.
somebody gives you an opportunity to be a leader, to be a contributor, to be on a project, they're giving you, that's a gift, and you can figure out how to to do it. And you're going to ask for help, and you're in some cases you're going to have to learn things along the way, but take it as an opportunity
Yeah.
to be successful. And I think those are the things that I've learned is don't be afraid that you're not 110% prepared for it.
Yep.
Take it on as something that you can grow into. So
Do you find that in terms of the opportunities you talked about, do you find that they vary in terms of frequency based on the size of the organizations? In other words, if you work for a smaller organization, those opportunities to shift your career trajectory potentially may come a
yeah,
lot more, or is
yeah.
it, and that it's fewer in a bigger organization because you have so many people in it?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, maybe a big
Yeah.
organization obviously involves there's more volume, but in many
Right.
cases, there's more specialties that
Of
are
course.
required. A
Yeah.
smaller group might force you to be more agile in terms of
Yeah.
what you take on.
Yeah.
I think the same principles apply though. If you take ownership, you work hard, and you show that you can do it with the right
Yeah.
approach and the right attitude. In a big or small group, you're still going to stand out.
Looking back at your career as you moved from Delta to Boeing, was there can you pinpoint, or do you think there's one moment that said, you know what, I'm going to think about a career in Boeing where I can go and market airplanes and sell airplanes to the worldwide customer base? Or was it just one of those things that just kind of happened in terms of just being right place, right client, right time kind of thing?
Um, Probably a little bit of the latter, if that makes sense, because
Yeah,
I think the one thing that I've always been, what's driven me from a passion standpoint, is how airlines work.
right.
People like, wow, you work for Boeing, you must be like an airplane geek. Yes, I
I
know a
think we
lot
all
about
are to a
airplanes.
certain degree,
I know a lot about airplanes, and I can
right?
tell you exactly which airplane, is flying in the sky, and people get annoyed, because of that. And I can tell you the economic benefits and the technical characteristics. But at the end of the day, if you told me to pick, what's your favorite thing about the industry, it's how airlines work. Because
Yeah,
without airlines being successful, we don't have a business. You don't have a business, right? I mean,
sure.
the airlines have to be able to use our products. And
Absolutely.
what's fascinating to me is how they compete, how they innovate, how we
Yep,
enable those innovations in terms of either new routes, new capabilities, better efficiency or technology, and how that applies to airline businesses. And
yeah,
so I've always been passionate about that, and that has enabled me to again find roles within the sales and marketing organization, either whether it's where should we go with new products,
yep,
or how do we market our products relative to our competitors,
absolutely.
how do we build relationships, and who do we kind of
Yep.
prioritize in terms of the industry. But that to me is kind of my kind of foundation, if that makes sense.
No, it absolutely does. Absolutely does. We're coming up on the end of the hour, but I wanted to wrap things up here a bit. But if I was going to ask you, if you had to leave the audience with one career principle that has served you throughout your journey, what would it be?
Oh man, I think I blew it on your leadership question, because I feel like those were kind of the same things that I
Yeah,
would say to people in terms of, don't be afraid to say
yeah,
yes when
yeah,
opportunities. Don't have necessarily a hard and fast like career path. Be open, in other
yeah,
words, to maybe slight course corrections
absolutely.
um, in terms of those things. It isn't always going to be the perfect job at the perfect time.
Yeah,
But at the end of the day, it might lead you to the perfect job at the perfect time. That's,
yeah,
I think, where I've arrived at is some jobs I loved, some jobs I liked, some bosses I hated, some bosses I learned so much from, but
yeah, absolutely.
treat it all as an opportunity to develop and to show. I think the other thing I would say is, back to what I said in that same question and answer, is you can control what you can control. Don't
Absolutely.
feel like somebody's passing you over. Don't feel like you got screwed out of a job or screwed out of this or that. If you shine and you work, and if you do your best and you take ownership and you're a great partner on your team and working with colleagues, that will eventually come to be very visible. In other
Yeah,
words, people will find you, and
yeah,
so I would say sometimes people can get antsy about things like that. But I mean, somebody who works hard, is passionate about the industry, and learns kind of about where they want to head, and then applies that. I mean, that's pure gold in terms of preparing you for other roles in the industry.
and I think you also answered one of the other things I was going to ask you is, look, obviously people always think, look, I'm coming out of college, I'm going to start my career in the aviation. My first job, I want it to be my dream job. And I always
Yeah,
find
yeah,
that, that's not always the case. You always, sometimes you end up in a role that you never thought you would get into. And you may find like, okay, this wasn't what I was hoping to be, but
yeah,
maybe,
yeah,
like you said, hopefully if I can employ some of the principles of like, I'm going to take the opportunity. I'm going to try
yeah,
and step up and be that leader in whatever
yeah.
organization I'm in. Maybe someday I'll get to that spot.
Sure. And
So
and I think just our own experience. You know, I got into the industry, like I said, kind of through the back door and almost
Yep.
accidentally, but I never wanted to leave, right?
Yeah.
And we can, we're not in tech, we're not like billionaires, but we all love what we do, or at least
Yeah.
the industry that we're a part of. And
Absolutely.
there's a role out there somewhere where you're gonna love it. And at the very end of the day, the industry is what keeps us excited and keeps us excited about going to work, I think.
1000%. Well, we've pretty much come up to the end of the hour. If there's any questions, happy to obviously take them at this time. But if not, Darren, thank you so much for your time, for sharing your insight with us, and for everybody that joined us today. We really do appreciate it. And, obviously wishing you all the best in your career. And for everybody that's on the call, I hope this was beneficial. Just as a quick reminder, please take a few moments to complete the online evaluation that pops up when you leave. We thank you in advance for your feedback, as it helps us curate more programs like these, not just for ISTAT, but for the Rising Executives program as well. A recording of today's presentation will be available on the ISTAT website within the next 48 hours. So please, for those that couldn't make it, I hope you get a chance to go check it out. And I encourage everybody interested to please visit the ISTAT website and check out the Rising Executives program. Hopefully we'll see you guys all at a future event. But Darren, thank you again for your time. And everybody, thank you for attending today's ISTAT Chats. Have a great day.